Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military Summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on the 21st of August of 2025. Today we have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first, let's continue with massive missile and drone strike that took place during the previous night. The Russians attacked mainly the western part of Ukraine, and we have a picture of Russian strike. As you can see, according to this picture, the Russians used significant number of drones. The Russians used cruise missiles of Caliber type. The Russians used several types of hypersonic missiles, Kinzhal and Tsirkon. And later, the Minister of Defense of Ukraine provided us the numbers. So this is the report of the Minister of Defense of the results of work of their air defense system. And according to this article, the Ukrainians during the previous night discovered 614 units of different types of missiles and drones. The Ukrainians are saying that the Russians used around 574 drones and they managed to destroy 546. Anyway, the numbers are very big, as you can see. And saying the truth, it seems that this is a new record that was established by the Russians. 614 units just during one wave of attack. A lot. Another important thing that I would like to point to attention is not just the numbers, but it's very interesting to know, and I would like to remind you that the last time when the Russians made a massive missile drone strike took place just on the 31st of July of 2025, so almost 21 days ago. So these are the numbers that were provided almost more than half a month ago on the 31st of July. The Ukrainians reported that during the night between the 30th and the 31st of July of 2025, the Russians used 370 air units, missiles and drones altogether. And after the 31st of July, we haven't received numbers like this. If, for example, if we take a look at the week between the 3rd and the 9th of August of 2025, the Ukrainians reported that the Russians, for example, on the 7th of August used just 112 units. For example, on the night to the 8th of August, just 100 units. During the night between the 8th and 9th of August, just 49 units. So approximately 100 air units the Russians have been used during the period of time between the 31st of July and the 21st of August. And today, as we can see, the Russians resumed their massive missile and drone strikes all over the entire territory of Ukraine. This is very important because every time the Russians begin their massive missile and drone strikes only before the beginning of another, let's say, major offensive operation. For example, the previous massive missile and drone strike period took place right before the beginning of a Russian breakthrough to the northeast of the city of Pokrovsk. So first the Russians were destroying Ukraine warehouses, ammo depots, concentration of forces, and then the Russians attack. And as a result of previous, let's say, period of attack, of offensive operation, the armed forces of the Russian Federation managed to break through Ukraine positions to the northeast of the Pokrovsk agglomeration. The Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the western part of the Donetsk region. The Russians managed to improve their positions significantly in the area of the city of Konstantinovka. So now we believe that the Russians, during the next several days, up to 1 week or up to 10 days, will continue massive missile strikes with the purpose to destroy Ukraine arms, weapons, ammo depot, fuel depots, equipment, concentration of forces. This will lead to the situation the Ukrainians will be out of blood, so without, let's say, lots of munition and so on. This can lead probably to another breakthrough in this or that direction. Another important detail that was provided by the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation regarding the previous night's strike. Last night, the armed force of the Russian Federation carried out a group strike with high-precision weapons as well as drones against enterprises of the Ukraine defense industry and the power facilities that supported the operation, military airfield infrastructure positions of operational tactical missile systems, ammunition and material depots of the armed forces of Ukraine. Once again, I would like to remind you that the Russians attacked the settlement of Mukacheva. As a result of this attack, very powerful, very huge plant, industrial complex was destroyed, most likely area where Ukrainians where produce some electronic parts for missiles, drones, and for other military equipment that Ukrainians use, let's say, for military purposes to attack Ukraine, to attack the Russian Federation, and to attack Russians along the line of combat contact. When talking about the effectiveness of Ukraine air defense, probably the most effective work of Ukraine air defense we can see in the area of the city of Lutsk. Here we can see how Ukrainians in the northwestern part of Ukraine were bringing down Russian drones and missiles that were flying in this direction. I would like to remind you that the Lutsk direction, this area is probably the most important area for Ukraine because there are several airfields. The first one is located in the vicinity of the city by the name of Dubna. Ukrainians use this airfield and the airfield in the vicinity of the city by the name of Lutsk for purposes for F-16s and Mirage purposes. They use these airfields, for example, to redeploy aircrafts, F-16s and Mirage from the European countries, and then using these airfields, they move these aircrafts further in the eastern direction to take part in combat operations along the line of combat contact, or in combat operations to attack deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. So what is happening right now? One thing, another, to make it clear. The 24th of August of 2025 is the Independence Day of Ukraine. Very important date when both the Russians and the Ukrainians will try to use this date to deal significant damage to each other. The Russians will try to show that Ukraine basically has no independence, and that the Russians during Independence Day can do whatever they like. And of course, the Ukrainians, most likely Ukrainians and Zelensky, will try to use the Independence Day with the purpose to use their long-range missiles that can fly deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation for 3,000 kilometers inside. Most likely, the Ukrainians will use this Independence Day to show that they have complete independence and that they managed to get this independence in war with the Russian Federation. And if you ask my opinion, I believe that the latest statement made by Trump that we will discuss during the next video about Ukraine in defense, that Ukraine in defense will not be able to win this war ever. It's better to attack if you want to win, and so on. This statement was made by Donald Trump today. I believe that all these things is the parts of the same puzzle, and I do really expect that by the Independence Day of Ukraine, we're gonna see massive missile strike all over the inside territory of the Russian Federation. Ukrainians will try to deal as much as possible damage to the Russian Federation. Of course, Ukraine will suffer consequences later, probably during the same date, but I believe that Zelensky believes that it's worth it. Now let's move to the line of combat contact. We have lots of very interesting updates. And first I would like to continue discussion the situation in the western Donetsk direction and in the Zaporizhzhia direction. We discussed the situation during the previous video, but by the end of the 21st of August we got additional details. So once again, what is happening currently in this area? The Russians of the group of forces East, after they finished the battle for the western part of the Donetsk region, were redeployed a bit further in the south and in the southwestern direction with the purpose to begin their major Zaporizhzhia offensive operation. And the main purpose of this Zaporizhzhia offensive operation is to attack between the cities of Gulyai-Polye and Pokrovsk from the east in the western direction. The Russians, by this offensive operation, are trying to dig in deeper and to cut the R85 road between these two cities, and then to handle with every single direction separately. So this is the Russian major offensive operation that was announced by Syrsky several days ago. From these positions, in the second part of this offensive, the Russians would be able to begin offensive in the southern direction and basically to outflank and to encircle the Ukrainians in the city of Gulyai-Polye. In the end, this will force the Ukrainians to fall back from this area further in the western direction, and from these positions, the Russians would be able to move further in the western direction as well with the purpose to attack the city of Orekhov. So this is exactly what the Russians are tasked for the late summer military campaign, autumn military campaign, and probably until early spring military campaign. The Ukrainians and Syrsky, they see this plan, they see all the situation. So that is why the Ukrainians began their counter-offensive operation in the western direction of Donetsk region, where the Russians managed to finish their task several weeks ago. And based on the reports that we started receiving from the 8th of August of 16th of August of 2025, the Ukrainians managed to improve their position significantly. So this is the first video that we discussed too many times since the 16th of August, when the Russians first managed to take the village. Then Ukrainians of 5th Heavy Mechanized Brigade counterattacked, and first they restored control over the village of Andreevka-Klevtsova. And today, as we discussed during the previous video, according to information we have, the Ukrainians of 5th Mechanized Brigade managed to improve their positions even further and to answer the settlement of Tolstoy. And if you remember, during the previous video, this territory was colored as area under complete Ukraine control. So we saw yellow color in this area, not the gray one and not the red one. So, but as you can see, before the beginning of this evening report, we adjusted the map back, or we adjusted the map as a contested area. So what did happen during the day? So once again, let's take a look at the video that was published by Ukrainian sources. So this is the video that was published by 5th Mechanized Brigade, and there are several important episodes. This is the first important episode, and I would like to point your attention to these fields that's to the north and to the bottom of the settlement. So very important episode. So as you can see, the fields are black to the north, and we can see the fields are green to the south, or something like this. Anyway, let's continue, and here we can see two Ukrainian soldiers that raised the flag. And once again, in the final part of the video, we can see once again fields to the north and fields to the south that were covered with black. What does it mean, black surface? What does it mean, this black surface? These are the signs of combat. These are the signs of very heavy clashes and combat between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Maybe these are the results of a Tolstoy strike, when the entire surface was burned out, and it's just like some black consequences. So this is the situation. And later, several experts made analysis of this video, and they compared the surface and the picture that we can see in this video with satellite images. So for example, this is the first picture, the first analysis. For example, in the top left corner, we can see the situation, the satellite picture, by the end of the 20th of August of 2025. So by the end of yesterday. So this is the situation. And the the bottom left picture, this one, is the satellite image of the situation in this area at the beginning of July. And I would like to point your attention to these black screens, these black clouds or black areas. These black areas are the consequences of very heavy clashes on the ground. So as you can see, according to the bottom left picture, we see that there were very heavy clashes in July, and that fields were completely black as a result of fire, or maybe as a result of attack with Tolstoy system. And when talking about this picture, we can see that there are lots of signs that the fields are black and there are signs of clashes. So which means that most likely the video that was published today by Ukrainian sources of 5th Mechanized Brigade was made in July of 2025. And as we discussed in the previous videos, they made a video before they withdraw their positions from this area, and now they use this video as a proof that they managed to counterattack and to restore control not just over the village of Andreevka-Klevtsova, Zelený Gai, but also they managed to restore control over the settlement of Tolstoy. Here we can see another picture of the same village, also from another angle, and we can clearly see that the fields were black, which means that let's say the signs of combat, very heavy combat in this area, are still fresh. This is important, that the signs of clashes are fresh, but the fresh and the latest satellite images tell us that there are almost no let's say, signs of combat around the settlement of Tolstoy, which means that the line of combat contact is very far from this area. But at the same time, as you can see, we, based on these conclusions and based on this analysis, we haven't adjusted the map back in Russian favor. We decided to color this territory as a contested area or the gray zone, because despite the fact that probably the signs and these, let's say, images are clear, it's still unclear whether the Ukrainians counterattacked or not, because right before I started making this video, several pro-Western analysts made conclusions and reported that indeed the Ukrainians counterattacked along N15 road and restored control over the village of Tolstoy completely. So also all these, let's say, statements made by Western analytics made also based on this video, it doesn't mean that they have some connections with the situation on the ground, but we see that more and more sources are, let's say, pointing their attention exactly to this area, because something strange and interesting is happening here. Because right almost at the beginning of another Russian major offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction that has very, very interesting objectives, we see Ukrainians counterattacked and managed to improve their positions also significantly. And if all these updates regarding Ukraine counterattack in the western Donetsk direction is true, and if Ukrainians are able to continue advancing further in the southeastern direction, this can lead to complete collapse of all Russia's plans regarding their major offensive operation in the Zaporizhzhia direction. Now they need to stop to stabilize the situation, and only then they can continue. But this can lead to complete moving out of timings or something like this. Now let's talk about the Pokrovsk agglomeration. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special happened in this area. Very heavy clashes and attacks carried out by the Russians were recorded in the area of the Pokrovsk agglomeration, but without changes on the ground. In this video, we can see how Russians attack the temporary deployment point of the armored forces of Ukraine with FAB in the area of the city of Mirnograd. A bit further in the northeastern direction, there are very heavy clashes for the settlement of Sofievka, Shakhova. The Russians are advancing, but as you can see, no progress on the ground was recorded. Now let's talk about the city of Konstantinovka. During the previous 24 hours, we received lots of very interesting updates from this area. As you can see, we have adjusted the map. We have adjusted the map in the area of Alexandra Shultina and along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Before we start, first let's compare the maps. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 20th of August of 2025. Let's start even earlier. This is the situation by the end of the 19th of August of 2025, and this is the moment when we got reports that the Russians, as a result of offensive operation, managed to enter the southeastern part of the city of Konstantinovka. This information was reported by pro-Russian resources, several. Furthermore, we got first report that the Russians managed to enter the settlement of Alexandra Shultina, and that the Russians crossed Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal and began their major offensive operation in these fields. So on the 19th of August of 2025, according to different sources, the Russians began their major offensive operation in this area with the purpose to establish complete control over the southeastern part of the Konstantinovka agglomeration, and most likely this operation is pretty successful. By the end of the 20th of August, we got reports that the Russians managed to improve their position significantly in the southeastern part. The most important is that the Russians, by this offensive operation, the city of Konstantinovka, either managed to enter and to cut the main supply lines that went in the direction of the city of the village of Alexandra Shultina from the settlement of Konstantinovka. So this, the most important supply line, was cut by the Russians as a result of entrance in the southeastern part of Konstantinovka. And by the furthermore, we got first reports and first geolocations that confirmed that the Russians managed to improve their positions to the south of Alexandra Shultina and to get the outskirts of the village. Geolocations were provided by Ukrainian sources. Now let's talk about the 21st of August, and probably now everything has become clear. A first report is coming from the southeastern part of the city of Konstantinovka, and according to this report, the armored forces of the Russian Federation left the southeastern part of the city and returned back to the settlement of Pritiechina. So first, I made the conclusion that most likely reports that were provided by pro-Russian resources that the Russians entered the southeastern part of Konstantinovka during the previous 2 days were fake reports, probably with the purpose to disinform Ukrainians. But now, later, we got additional reports that forced me to change my mind. So right after this report that the Russians left the southeastern part of Konstantinovka, the armed force of the Russian Federation, more precisely the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation, reported that as a result of decisive actions by units of the southern group of forces, the settlement of Alexandra Shultina was taken by the Russians completely. So the Russians secured this village, and we got another geolocation from the area along the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. Here we can see how Ukrainians of 36 Brigade were attacking Russians along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal, and how Ukrainians were attacking several positions of the armed forces of the Russian Federation in this area. Based on the report of the Minister of Defense and based on the report and video that was published that we've just watched, we have adjusted the map in this area. So we colored the Alexandra Shultina completely, and we colored strongholds along Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. So now it's clear that the Russians first managed to break through Ukrainian defense in the southeastern part. They secured this area, cut the main supply lines, and while the Russians were holding their positions in the southeastern part and blocking Ukrainian logistic, the main Russian army began advancing in the area of Alexandra Shultina, and the main Russian army advanced on the Ukrainian side of the Seversky Donetsk-Donbass Canal. And these two offensive operations took just 2-3 days. The Russians secured Alexandra Shultina, the Russians improved their positions on the Ukrainian side of canal, and when these two tasks were finished by the Russians, they withdrew their positions from the southeastern part of Konstantinovka and returned back to Pritiechina, because the Russians realized that they had no chances to dig in deeper, because Ukrainians introduced additional reinforcements and reserves, and they were about to begin counteroffensive, and then the Russians would suffer huge losses. So that is why the Russians preferred to fall back. But there were no need to control the southeastern part of Konstantinovka, because the main objectives of the armed force of the Russian Federation, of the group of forces south, were completed. We're talking about the village of Alexandra Shultina and strong foothold on the Ukrainian side of canal. So now we understand that Ukrainians in coming days will abandon their positions completely in this pocket. They will retreat, probably this upcoming night they will begin this process, and then the battle for the city of Konstantinovka will begin, or at least the battle for the line along the river of Krivoy Tarets. We're talking about Kliban-Byk, Nilipovka, Ivanopolie, and Plishevka. By the way, the Ukrainians during the previous 24 hours managed to improve their positions, to improve their logistic around the lake around this Kliban-Byksky water reservoir. They managed to create additional roads for evacuation and rotation, and during the previous 24 hours, the Russians were over-concentrated, trying to destroy as many as possible recently created roads from one bank to another bank of Kliban-Byksky water reservoir, and the Russians established FPV drone control over the main supply lines. So we see that the Russians are intensifying their activities in this area, offensive actions as well, which means that during the next days we're going to see huge improvements on the ground in Russian favor, and the Russians will shorten the distance to the city of Konstantinovka as let's say short as possible. Now let's talk about the Sivas direction. During the previous 24 hours, nothing special was recorded. Pro-Ukrainian resources reported about changes on the ground in Russian favor in the area of the village of Tarskoye. Pro-Russian resources reported they attacked the settlement of Kolodisi from the west. Nothing special. When talking about the Kupinsk direction, the same story. The Russians continue attacking Ukrainian positions all over the entire Kupinsk direction. They destroy FPV drone positions. They destroy Ukraine warehouse and ammo depots, preparing this foothold before the beginning of another major offensive operation that most likely is going to take place very soon. And that's it for today. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel, put your likes on my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.